Good morning, everyone. My name is Jillian, and I work in the curatorial programs team here at the gallery. Our curatorial programs aim to expand our curatorial narratives by creating different entry points for our audiences. Thank you for joining us this morning for today's talk with Violet Oon as part of our exhibition, Suddenly Turning Visible, Art and Architecture in Southeast Asia, 1969 to 1989, which we currently find ourselves in. Just some housekeeping before we start. We're so happy that many of you have come to join us this morning, but please also be mindful that we're in the gallery space, so do be mindful of the artworks that are around you. The dimming of the lights, which just happened to go on, happen every morning at 11 a.m., and it's to highlight an artwork at the back over there by Thomas Yeo, and also this work here by Kim Lim. So it happens every morning at 11 a.m. and 3 p.m. in the afternoons. And also, today we'll get the opportunity to look at some of the articles that Violet wrote in various publications throughout the 1970s and 1980s. Just to note that these materials are copyright of Singapore Press Holdings. So if we could please request everyone from refraining from taking photographs of the materials. These are all available for public viewing online. So perhaps if you want to find out more and read the articles, you can take note of the headlines and then simply just do a search on the library's website, and those will be able to come up. So now that I've got all the boring stuff out of the way, please let me hand over to today's moderator. Today's moderator is Tamaris Goh, who's the head of our curatorial programs team here at the gallery. And I'll hand over now to her so that she can introduce us to the star of today's show, Violet Oon.
Thank you for coming on a Saturday morning. And yeah, we're soaking up in the atmosphere of the dim light. So I can't really, I'll try my best to read. I'll introduce the exhibition just a little bit before we start. Okay. Suddenly Turning Visible, Art and Architecture in Southeast Asia, examines the period between 1969 to 1989, where the curators of this exhibition set forth to establish exciting connections, seeking comparisons in a moment in history. A period where there was a kind of, I would say, frenziness in the air. Things were not very clear. It was post-independence, post-colonial, people were fighting for this notion of what's independence. There was rapid urbanization. Things were kind of desperate. Many things eagerly contesting, all wanting to supersede an old, still energy. There was tension, and the tension made it a very exciting period. For example, it was a period where the concrete material was discovered and lashing out upfront as the material, challenging a new wave and summoning new modes of approaches, deliberation, and resolution of some sorts. Concrete bashed into all shapes and forms, most evidently in architecture. It seemed at that moment everyone's eyes were suddenly plied open as if a newborn baby, and their senses provoked as if for the very first time. Their ears became attuned to new sounds and perhaps music. In artist Ray Albano's own words, and where the title of this exhibition has sought inspiration from, I quote, "Where one is made relatively aware of an environment suddenly turning visible." It was a time where artists articulated new approaches that was freely reinvented in tandem with already known international art movements, but importantly in dialogue with folk and vernacular traditions happening here in the world. The curators of this exhibition, Cheng Jiayun, Jolene Low, Sing Eugene, and Shabir Hussain Mustafa, carefully chose 3 regional institutions: the Cultural Center of the Philippines, 1966 to the present; Alpha Gallery here in Singapore, 1971 to 1988; and Barassi Institute of Modern Art from 1974 to 1988 as a way to reassemble, reconfigure, and to reconnect, pivoting towards an understanding of a kind of energy or kind of essence needed in the making of this period. What constitutes of this making, we are here to unravel now, today. We are here to discuss with our very special guest. She would be able to bear testimony to the art scene here, and specifically to speak about Alpha Gallery in Singapore. Actually, our guest here needs no introduction. She's a brand name in her own right. She's a chef, co-owner of restaurants and food writer for cookbooks and columns on Peranakan cuisine. Her food career began when she penned her first food column in 1974 for New Nation. She would go on to become a dominant voice in Singapore's food scene, authoring popular cookbooks, including Peranakan Cooking and Singapore Family Cookbook. I told her last week, I have the Singapore Family Cookbook somewhere. She was eventually dubbed Singapore's Food Ambassador in 1988 by the Singapore Tourism Board and was awarded Lifetime Achievement Award for outstanding contribution to tourism at the Tourism Awards last year. But what is lesser known about our guest here today is that before her foray into food, she started her career as a cultural critique, an important voice in the 1970s. Her art reviews from that time included many exhibitions on many artists and many exhibitions in spaces, including the Alpha Gallery. Some of the reproductions of her articles are featured in this exhibition here. May we put our hands together to welcome Ms. Violet Oon.
Good morning. Thanks for being here. Those of you who are behind, please be very artistic and sit on the floor in front. This is an art space after all, but not beyond that black line because we're protecting our art. Please come and sit down. Do the children want to come and sit down? Okay. Yeah. Don't stand. Just sit in front. Yeah, thank you.
I'd like to congratulate you about the Lifetime Contribution Awards last year. Yeah. On this note, I would like to ask you, what was your proudest achievement?
Okay, this brochure here, this sort of program is my proudest achievement. Because you cannot put your picture next to Mickey Mouse, they'll sue you for millions. The only time you can put your picture next to Mickey Mouse is when Disney does it. And I was very proud when I was asked to give a talk last year on anything for Disney people, and that I'm put next to Walt Disney. So this is like very proud, right? And it was a storytelling workshop, boot camp by Disney in Singapore. And little did I know that Oscar winners were here. But I think maybe most important, that everything starts with Once Upon a Time. Every story. And everything in life is a story. And that's how I've been approaching, things in life. And maybe before I talk about the music and the art and everything, I actually studied sociology and political science and geography. And I do not use a GPS because I really want to know my place in space. That from outer space, I know exactly which part of the red dot I'm in. And I think people have so much space in sort of Facebook, etc., but they don't know their real space in the world, where they are, physical space. Yeah, so this was quite fun.
So once upon a time, yes. We want to, our curators here managed to unearth some treasures, I would say, that really importantly led to the research of what happened during this period, and Violet really contributed. So let's take a look at your career. Maybe we can talk about these moments.
Okay, this one was when I started in 1971 as a journalist. And when I'm looking back, nothing is planned, you know. You just make sure you have lots of fun. But you make sure that you be the best you could possibly be. And I think that's maybe the mantra from my father. He was Lee Kuan Yew's cohort, I mean, one year above, and comes from a generation of people, men and women who were very dynamic, innovative, thinking of, very deep things like freedom, independence, and so he brought me up to think that, you have to do the best you could possibly be. And that when you are gifted, that's what it means. It's a gift, it's not yours. It doesn't belong to you, but it's gifted by somebody else. You think God, but you're gifted. So you have to fulfill those gifts. It's a duty to fulfill the gifts, otherwise what's the gift for? And that I think he brought me up never to be, I'm not competitive with other people. I'm competitive with myself. And I just saw a tribute to Kobe Bryant. And that's exactly, he was very competitive to other people, but he was competitive with himself his whole life. He practiced and practiced to reach his idea of perfection. He doesn't care what other people's idea of perfection is. And this one was, I sang as a hobby. And the other thing is that I tell people that, this is me. Don't ask me why I don't look like that now. A lot of people do that. That was 1973 in King and I, Princess tapped him. It was an amazing production. So I think it's important to know that there was an amazing life. And that life did not start like now. Which a lot of creative people, I'm going to share this, a lot of creative people think that life started with them. And it was an amazing production. It was by the Young Musicians Society, Ministry of Education, which meant it had lots of money, and a cast of thousands because it could use all the slaves from school, children dancing. And we had amazing costumes. I think Wing Yang, and who became, now I remember his name suddenly, who became the window dresser in Tanks, which had the most amazing windows for 20 to 30 years. And he created the costumes and the jewelry, and that statue was actually brought from Thailand. I think maybe in those days they allowed it. And it had amazing cars, amazing, and it was amateur in that people were not paid, but it was professional otherwise. Okay, so this is King and I, and this is me dancing. Okay, I did once learn Balinese dance, and my fingers go like that, okay? And you just have to learn everything you can if you're interested in, and not whether it's going to give you a profession or not. And actually, all my working lives started off from my hobbies. So what I studied, and I think another good piece of advice from my father was that when I went to university in 1968, I asked him, what should I study? He said, it doesn't matter what you study, because a lot of people study what's like going to give them the best jobs. By the time they graduate, everybody's there. Like there are 10,000 people for 3 best jobs. And you mustn't base on that. You just study what you want, because you go to university to learn how to think. It doesn't matter. So choose anything you want. And I think that was a very good piece of advice. Because a lot of people now, I think a lot of young people are so lucky. What they're studying and what they're doing are 2 totally different things. And it's not a mismatch. It's just how you want to progress with the next part of your life. So that was me dancing.
So I think you danced,
Yeah.
I hear you sing too.
I used to sing. I had a stroke 5.5 years ago, so my voice has sort of gone. Hopefully it'll come back sooner or later. It splits.
Just a vote of hands. Would you like to hear Violet sing?
Yeah, okay. This was interesting. that was last year. I was asked to take part in the army video for National Day song. And then I said, I can't sing, I need training. And this is the army, will send you a trainer. So I couldn't argue, right? So they sent me a trainer, and these are the things I did. And you just, I was quite surprised. And this whole talk is me suddenly turning visible, right, in a different way. Yeah, so that was quite fun.
We'll come back to the bit about singing later, because I think there is indeed quite a big link to acoustics during that period, what we think of acoustics. But then, then later on, I remembered as a girl, I read a lot of Violet's article. I think that was probably formative in how I learned about art, and how I subsequently am here, sitting. So it made an impact, I would say.
Oh, thank you, really.
Yeah. How did you enter into your career as a journalist?
Graduated in 1971. You must remember that there are a lot of my cohorts here. Irene Ho is a writer, Irene Ho. And that we women like us, we grew up in women's lib. When I went to university in 1968, you must remember there were the student riots in Paris. And we were inspired. And there was, and women like us, make love, not war, burn the bra, and, miniskirts. And we actually followed those trends. And, and one of the trends was that the reason I cook is that I was brought up to be non-sexist. So it didn't matter. The women of my generation were not only burning the bra, they threw away the wok, because it was a sign of bondage for the women. And that's why I'm one of the few people who cook, because at that time, women were expected to cater for the men in their lives. And I remember that, I'm a Peranakan girl, that we lived a very Jane Austen life. The father comes home, you're there taking off his slippers, you made the kueh, and then he's sitting down, and after dinner you're playing the piano. And it's true, it happened in homes in Malacca, which I grew up, part of my childhood in Malacca. And there'll be if you have 4 children, it's a quartet, Yeah, somebody learns the piano, it's true. Somebody learns the guitar, and somebody learns, not guitar, it was too low class. Somebody learns the violin, viola, cello, and double bass. And really, after dinner, the children entertained the father. And there was one friend in my generation who was sent to England to learn. In those days, women only learn piano, ballet, or nursing, or teaching, when they went to England, and it's true. And she was sent to London so that she could she could cook for her brother. And she had such resentment and anger, and I couldn't understand it at all, because that wasn't how I was brought up. But that shows why women refused to cook, because it was bondage. So I was one of the few women. But what I'm amazed now is, like my daughter's generation here, they're all now earth mothers. They cook, they do all these things because they were not expected to. And so I came from that generation, and I became a journalist because of space, of a place and time. I didn't want to work in Jurong. It was a new place. It was like a boondocks in the middle of nowhere, and it was like a new industrial. And I didn't want to work in the Shenton Way area because it was so secretary-ish. So I stayed at home and did nothing. My father asked me finally, isn't it about time you found a job? And we lived in Cane Hill, because isn't it about time you gave your mother some money? Right? So he said, okay, Uncle Teng Soon is editor at Straits Times, why don't you ask him? And I never thought I could write, so that's how I asked him, and I got a job. Now, in those days, we were not brought up to think that we are creative. So I never knew I could write, because that's a creative process. We're brought up to believe that we're interpretive. As a singer, I'm singing somebody else's. So I never thought I could write that way, and none of us were brought up to think we're creative. We would interpret other people's music, other people's, plays. all other people's things. And that was really how we were brought up. And so I became a journalist and discovered, and actually I started, and I became an art writer, and I know there are some art historians here who've done their masters, because in England, in school, I was in England in 61 to 63, which was when the Beatles burst on the scene, and I was so unaware because I was into Beethoven instead. And I only discovered the Beatles when my children grew up, you know, and I was in England and I was studying there, and you know, I came back in 1963. Now what was I going to say? A senior moment, forgot, doesn't matter. I shall just go on. And you know, it's like, I was in school there, and then my father gave me a choice. I started singing because I had, you know, I had a voice from young. And my mother marched down to the Royal Academy of Music. We stayed in Wimpole Street. And she went to the janitor, the doorman, and said, okay, I want my daughter to learn a piano. Can you find a student that can teach her? And I want her to learn singing. Can you find a student? And then she's learning theory. I finally learned theory from the professor of theory on the 5th floor on the attic. And my singing teacher became a professional singer. And my piano teacher became the top examiner who came to examine in Singapore. So, you know, she had that daring, which I think I learned from her, that, you know, you just go and ask, you know. The most is people say no, right? You know, that's the thing. And so I came back and I became a journalist. And, okay, I studied art in school as a subject, which I think is very important, because not all of us can be artists. A lot of people study art as you must draw and paint. You know, I study music, you must actually play something. But I studied art as a subject, and because of that, I became the art critic, believe it or not. From the age of 11 to 13, there were no masters in art. But I think in Europe, when you did that in England, it opened your eyes, because, you know, you were studying the masters, and so I became the art critic. And then I became the music critic because I learned singing, and I learned piano. But to me, it was such an amazing job, because I was thinking, wow, music critic, 2 free tickets in the front, don't have to pay $50 each, you know? And then as an art, and I it was such an opportunity without realizing it, because you got windows to the world of people who were creative. And that's how I started. But at the same time, I was a writer on social issues. A sad sort of thing of our times now. When I said that, somebody thought it was Tatler, you know. I said, no, social meant social issues. But people in Singapore now think it's Tatler, or, you know, writing on parties. So it's like social issues on women, on those subjects. And to me, it was such an amazing opportunity to be in that time and place. And when I started as an art critic, and actually, the most important I've always felt as a journalist, then, no media, no social media, no internet, that you are the window to the world for your reader. And to me, that was my most important task, to be the window to the world. So I wasn't a journalist in the way I would want to be develop a career, or, you know, think that way. But that was my task. It was, you know, you couldn't deviate to that. And what window are you providing to the world of your reader? That you must be as honest as, okay, and this one, you must be as honest as possible in providing them the window that they will be able to see what that world is trying to say. So the good thing about a journalist is that you actually don't put yourself in front. You take the background, and you have to sort of put yourself in the back, and it was, to me, so important that you captured the other persons. What the other person was trying to say and do, and what was like happening. And today I went to look up something. Google is amazing. I love Agatha Christie's, I love murder mysteries. My taste in books is very shallow. You know, I don't like anything deep. But anyway, and she had this, and I was looking for the title, and this was lovely. She was married to an archaeologist, and I'm sure that colored the way she wrote. And she went on a dig in Syria, and the title of the book is Come and Tell Me How You Live. And then I thought that was the most amazing title, Come and Tell Me How You Live. You know, and you'll see later what I mean. And then, yeah, I think she's giving me a look to shut up, okay? I will go on.
You said that writing is a very noble profession as well. We have in the slide earlier on, you see that Violet was, she was called the Singapore's answer to Barbara Walters in the US. I think some of you may know who Barbara Walters
Yes.
Yeah, and then you mentioned that you do not know whether to squeal with delight or squirm with horror.
Yeah, I wasn't sure.
And then also you're given a chance to interview the president as well.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
So there are all these opportunities, but I think the spirit you mentioned as well, that it was windows. As a journalist, you provided the window to many issues, and therefore it's a very noble profession. Your window to the world. So being frank was very important. Being frank, being able to just to charge with, you have to be quite courageous as well. There were issues such as women issues that you were, campaigning for. So maybe we can talk a little bit about that.
Actually, it didn't. I wasn't even going with a noble intent. It was nothing about being frank. It was nothing about being noble, and I think that's part of what's wrong when people go out intending to be noble or intending to have another motive. I was just intending to come and show me how you live. Come and show me what you are. And then, but because of my upbringing, I had very liberated parents who actually, when I was born in 1949, and they told me this, that they decided to have only one child, whether it's a girl or a boy. And nobody in 1949 decided that. And they only wanted one child because they wanted to give this child every opportunity. And they did not mean money. They meant education, looking at things. And I've been in 4 kindergartens and 7 schools, and none of which I was expelled from. Okay? And then, and I was put in the, I was put always with adults. And I never remember my parents calling me a child. I was a person. I do not remember, children do this or children do that. And then, being brought up that way, and my mother was actually a secretary. She was a top secretary. In those days, men were secretaries, And she had to give up, and she had to be a corporate wife because my father was in Shell. She had to be a wonderful corporate wife, like Hillary Clinton had to be a corporate wife to Bill Clinton. And she resented it her whole life, that she did not have her own profession and she did not earn her own money. And that was so important to her. And so I had a very different upbringing from the rest of my generation, I think. I know I went on my first plane when I was 2 years old. I still have pictures at Kallang Airport. My first cruise when I was 2. And so these experiences sort of gave you, you don't even know that you have these experiences, right? But I've always been brought up to fight for what you believe in. My father said, even if you don't agree with your mother, but if you believe in, it's okay. So it was never a noble thing. It was never anything it was just natural. That you be frank, you tell it as it is, but and then when I did social issues as a working mother and giving birth, and then even till now, I actually do, if I'm going to advocate something, I actually believe in it myself. So when I interviewed Professor Wong Hock Boon, when I was on breastfeeding, I really believed he was correct. And in those days, every woman bottle fed. And to the point where my daughter is here, she doesn't know this, but when my son, her brother was born 5.5 years later, when my son was born, and I was writing about breastfeeding, so I breastfed both of them. But I took it as but I was not obsessive like in women now, like so obsessive and then going, don't make it a religion. Like, they will pump the breast and do all that. I was like very natural, like a village woman, like, you know what I'm saying? No? And if I'm going to go out, I started, I would feed them the bottles, I would wean them off. And I brought my son at 5 months old in a Moses basket to Alexandra Hospital to demonstrate breastfeeding to women, to show how easy it was. But I wasn't the one to be so coarse about it to expose my breast in public and go and feed. So I wasn't that way. It was more that it was Professor Wong's mission that I believed in, and I thought that I should support his mission. And working mothers, it was like, these are actual experiences that they went through. So even today, when sometimes people tell me about, social media is also, everything is coding left, right, and center, that, people are not happy. I said, let me find out. I want to go and actually speak to people that you are talking about. I want to know, and let me go and find out. So yesterday, I had some opinion about the conference hall. And yesterday, I actually went to visit it to see whether my opinion was correct. So sometimes, if you want to really be in depth, you have to put a lot of work into it. Like I will tell people who are cooking, I said, don't tell me there's no tauge unless you've been to 400 supermarkets. Don't tell me there isn't anything. If man can put somebody on the moon in 1960-something, anything is possible. Right? Now, I must show this one. So I wrote on women's issues. Pathetic, the Singapore women, seen but never heard. Look at the other headlines. The Filipino women, the Malaysian women were so dynamic, and she's still around, Rafida Aziz. And, the Thai women, they were behind the husbands, they were the businessmen. And the one that are missing is the Indonesian women, freedom fighters, they actually fought. And Singapore women, pathetic. And it's true. And it was the political norm then, and I think still pathetic, Let's just go on. So I'm frank, but I think you cannot be cruel. So when I wrote my reviews, I was very frank. But you're very frank to be honestly portraying what that person is doing. You're not being frank to score points for yourself, which I think happens a lot. Yeah. And this was, yeah.
Maybe we go back to music, because you had, very trained years, and what was your experience? Because you spoke about conference hall earlier.
Okay, conference hall was the most amazing, and people don't know, and I think sad that people don't know, that you must know. You cannot only know today, and you cannot only know like 4 centuries ago. 20, 30, 40, 50 years ago, you must know, and it's not vintage, it's not old-fashioned, it is, you must know, And so I was a critic, and I went to this was New York Philharmonic, in the National Stadium, believe it or not, Zubin Mehta. We had people like that, and and I could hardly realize that it must have been amplified, and I didn't realize. So I praised, I just gave one sentence, that, must have been done, it was so artfully done. And you have to acknowledge the work of everybody, and not just the musician. And this, interesting, when the National Stadium was coming down, I got a phone call from the the sports people. Will you come and talk about National Stadium coming down? It's the most hilarious, because I'm the least sport person in the whole wide world. I do not exercise at all, and I'm trying now. And in the 70s, I found a reason for not exercising. I saw a program on arthritis, and every dancer, athlete, everybody, however wonderful they are when they're young, when they're old, they're like that. Okay? their limbs have gone, their joints have. So I said, okay, I found the wonderful reason why, the reason why I'm not exercising. I'm preserving my joints for my old age. Okay? So I went there, and they sat me there, and I talked about this and that. I was thinking, I'm the least sports person. But that sound engineer remembered what I wrote. So as a writer, you don't even realize the impact you have on somebody else's life. He told them to interview me for the National Stadium coming down because of one line I wrote that the sound must have been good. So when you're honest and you are acknowledging somebody else's work, you never realize the impact it has on them forever. So you must also realize that when you're critical, you must also be very careful. The criticism has to improve them, and not to make them feel bad. So that was how I critiqued, as a food critic, as a music critic, as an art critic as well. And that was very important.
So back to conference hall.
Yeah.
So
Okay, it was amazing.
The acoustics by the Mac.
I went yesterday and I read. Apparently, it was the first building that was really acoustic properly and done by Lim Chong Kiat, who I came to this talk. Irene Ho, my friend, brought me because it's Lim Chong Kiat is going to be talking, and I was thinking, wow, I'm so amazed that the gallery can unearth Chong Kiat, who is one of the, I think, impetus for, he created the Alpha Gallery. And I came to the talk and I said, actually, Chong Kiat is a Renaissance man. And he was a Renaissance, he's still to now, he's an amazing, fine figure of a man. Just to tell you, all the women of my generation were lusting after him. And he still looks lustable. He's in his 80s, how old is he? 90s, right? If you can see a picture. He's got such energy and dynamism. He actually, but he admired other people. He created Alpha Gallery. I got to know him because he found out I sang, so he just hijacked me. And he had clavichord, harpsichord in his house in Star Point in Pasir Panjang, which was a Mecca, sort of artistic people went there. He discovered the Balani School, and you can see it there. And he's an architect. And he went to create conference hall. I think he got obsessed with acoustics. He went to MIT. He's Malaysian, by the way, still in Penang, up the hill. And he, I think, did this hall with the best acoustics. And I heard Victoria de Los Angeles singing there. And we had the top musicians and the top artists coming to town. I heard Ravi Shankar. And another concert hall was the Shangri-La Ballroom, because there were not enough, there was no esplanade. But it was such a dynamic period. I started writing in 71, and I think I stopped writing full-time maybe in mid-80s. But it was such a period of dynamism, excitement when you were in music and the arts. We had amazing impresarios, and the word is hardly used. I think a lot of us remember Donald Moore. He was one of the British who came, and he brought, he had a gallery. He brought Royal Ballet, I think. I saw Margot Fontaine. And, and to me, I was so fortunate to be able to meet these people and to go, wow. I don't know how many music critics today do that. Because you're in the presence of a great talent, and how many music critics and art critics take it as a job, which I think is sad. Because there's nothing more exciting than to be in the presence of a great talent. And to sort of admire, and I think admiration is so important. Would you like to show my painting of Atayap with this thing? And and I met Singapore artists, and there was Thomas Yeo, Anthony Poon, and you are so excited because these are people who actually create stuff. Now this is a wedding gift I requested from my friends. There was a wedding registry, and I was so stupid I never collected anybody's art, which I could have been standing on a fortune now. But I was just admiring it. You see, it didn't occur to me that I could buy it, And then, so this is a lovely painting, and I admired Arthur because he was a school teacher who wrote poems and created art, and and this painting disappeared for about 15 years, I'm not joking. I couldn't find it in my flat. And I suddenly moved at the end of last year. It suddenly turned visible, it was hidden somewhere. And that's why the colors are so intact, because it never saw sunlight, And it's so powerful, but he's this gentle person when I interviewed, and I loved it that he wrote poetry, and I think in those days where you are brought up to admire people who create, like you are just mesmerized. I mean, we have a great playwright here, Jose Sulaiman, and I'm still in admiration of his work, And I think a lot of people who are creative, even now, do not know how to admire somebody else's work. So Chong Kiat admired, and he was amazing. He started Alpha Gallery. He was impetus, and he started multimillionaires to collect art. He interested Wee Cho Yao in art, and that's how the UOB started its art collection. That's how UOB had Artist of the Year. So you don't have to be a powerful person to have an impact, or a very rich person. You can have the impact on the rich person. He started it was so at that time when I wrote about art, it was so exciting. The artists were not painting to be collected, and then they were not painting to be hopefully doing well at auction. They were painting to express themselves, and maybe you said that it's painting to where it's new horizons, a new beginning, belonging as a nation, as a people, because most people were immigrants. My great-great-great-grandfather's grave is 1895 in Bukit Brown, a humongous grave. Now, very few people have great-great-great-grandfathers who are here. We are sort of city of immigrants. And it was such an amazing scene, and I'm so happy that it's brought to life. But how many artists today know about that time? And it's very sad.
Maybe you can, you mentioned that you put together an event, so you can also influence people to look at art. Maybe you can speak about putting it together.
Well, after I stopped writing, but to me, I'm still a journalist. In 1986, the other thing to be is that when you're brought up in my generation, is that you're just very daring, Or not daring, just anything also can, what's the big deal? So I was asked by my friends in a company here that would I do, that the PR company in Hong Kong wanted to do a bond dealers conference in 1986 before the market crashed, and Goldman Sachs wanted to have like the best, hold on, wait. Sorry. I wanted to have a best party of this conference. And banks are competitive, right? So they gave a magic word that they don't mind. They wanted in the Sultan of Johore's palace, and they were willing to donate money for his cause. Number one, I'm very Singaporean. I'm not going to have any money go to Johor, it's better come here. Secondly, so I told Goldman Sachs, you cannot go to Sultan of Johore's palace because you can't have liquor. So that was the end of the party. Okay? You must always give the exact correct. Now, when you want somebody not to do something, you must find the exact correct sentence that convinces them. No need to have a long argument. You can't have liquor, and then there's going to be this jam. They couldn't care, but can't have liquor. So Goldman Sachs cannot have a party with no liquor. So I said, why don't you come to the National Museum? So I went to, at that time, I had been writing, and I was very in touch with the, this building resonates with me, the other side, City Hall, where I would interview ministers and, for example, so I went to, I think, PERMSEC, Mr. Lee Wai Kok. So I said, okay, why do we have this party at the museum? Because I had such an admiration of art and people who are creative that to me, the most best party in the world and the most high-class party is in the museum. Look at the Metropolitan Museum party till today. And so they never had a party in the museum before. And then I said, okay, Mr. Lee, can we have the museum? And you know, Mr. Lee is very People's Association type, if you know what I mean. You know, he's very straight. So I said, Mr. Lee, can we have the National Museum? But you must, but first of all, Mr. Lee, do you want $50,000? That's very important, right? Because apparently, and Irene Ho had written about this party, that the whole acquisition budget for the whole of Singapore was $30,000 for the year, 1985. So the most important, Mr. Lee, do you want $50,000 or not for the museum? But you have to give me the National Museum for 2 days, and I can get you the donation. So then I went back to Goldman Sachs, and Goldman Sachs says, can it be $25,000? I said, cannot. Because I can see $50,000 in headlines on the front page. I cannot see $25,000. And then $50,000 you can get a minister. 25 cannot. Very, very not. So okay. So you hear this Malaysian horse trading going on. I was doing that 1986. Okay. So I said okay. So I said, Mr. Lee, can we have it? But I need it for 2 nights. So I said, we're not going to give a check. It's so low class. We're going to buy the art. So he said, okay, we don't have enough Singapore masters. So we need, so I said, okay, let's have, which are the 3 masters? Liu Kang, Cheong Su Ping, Chen Wen-si. And so it was great fun for me to follow the curators, I think Connie Shears, to visit artists and to, select their works. And I think that was very high price for them, $50,000 among 3 artists. Hopefully PA did not keep half of it. But anyway, People's Association. Anyway, so I said, no, we cannot have a check. It's very, 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 very low class, So we must have the 3 artworks presented. And so the artworks were presented, and then there was a beautiful story. Do we have it in Sunday Times? That, not yet, maybe before that, just now, that showed the 3 artworks in front of the National Museum, and then, like, my client had no, not this one. No, this one, not this one, not this one, another one. At the party, it was like the best party ever, $100,000. In 1986, it's like maybe $10 million now, right? And before the crash. And then, so, we went, I had a ball, when it went to like sushi. It was the old drama center, the food came there, 10,000 orchids, just be very big. But all that wasn't worth it if there was no art. And exactly because of the art, the actual party itself in their own banking magazine was the only one that got a mention. So, it's like, so that was fun.
I think it's really like what we said, I mean, I quote Prof. Chan Heng Chi as well. She said that, really it's for us to set the horizon during this period. That, we had a conversation this morning that really no one was there to set the example, because a lot of things were unprecedented during that time as well. So it was really that you set a certain benchmark, and I think, it was kind of influencing as well how a certain lifestyle could be achieved.
Yeah, I think you just have to, and I think you have to be a bit outrageous, and have fun. That's part of it. And I think, so the artists then, had fun creating. I don't know who bought their works, but there was the Nanyang School, and there was this, the Singapore School, and a lot of contemporary art. And I think when you see this exhibition, there's Singapore, Philippines, and Malaysia. And I have a staff member here. I brought her to Manila. And this is telling of our time, of our people now. Social media is so immediate, but you don't know anything else. And I was in Manila as we passed the culture. I said, oh my God, the Culture Center of Philippines is still here. It's still such a relevant building. She never heard about it in her life, which is very sad. So today she went to the exhibition. She was, oh my goodness, Philippines was so great, But so unless you know this history about yourself, you have no idea. And I think, you don't create an impact unless you know what was before you. I saw Kobe Bryant's tribute beginning of this week. Now, and we have like musicians, artists, but who knows who painted 30, 40 years ago? I'm not sure how many. Are they studying it? Maybe they are. But we had Alicia Keys, and what's the other one? Christina Aguilera. And they are like pop, like cutting edge, right? But Alicia Keys played Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, which means she admired his work before. And I think Christina Aguilera sang Ave Maria, which I sang, and with such depth of feeling, that you must know, back to the front, you must understand your past to create and to understand the future. Otherwise, you cannot. And you have no admiration. And it's like, how many of our, I said, if you go to, let's say, America, why is it still creating huge, amazing pop music, or Britain? Because everybody still references the Beatles.
Maybe, Violet, you said that you were given a choice to stay in Britain
Or come home.
or to come home. Your father gave you a choice. And
it was 1963, and I was studying music, so my music teacher told my parents, can she stay here? Because she's got potential, and then, rather than going home. Now, in those days, when you went, it was by boat, and then when you go by, you don't go back for holiday every 3 months, which people do now. And, and although we flew. So my father told me, okay, you can stay here, and we will, support you, but just remember you'll never have a country. Or you can come home. So I said, I'm going home. But he gave me that choice. But he explained to me what that choice meant, not that you're going to have a great career. That's not the point. The point is, what does it actually mean? And in those days, before internationalism, which happened only recently, people didn't have, because he saw so many of his friends who went to make their homes in England, didn't belong. And you cannot go home. They didn't belong either way. So I said, okay, I'm coming home. And I was so happy I made the choice to come home. And maybe part of people like me, or like a lot of us who feel so much for a country and a culture, is that we've been somewhere else. And we've been somewhere else long enough that you miss it. I remember that I said, I miss the food. I could practice smell the wonton mee, and I missed the whole life in Singapore. And that when I came home, I did this video last year when I got this tribute thingy, that when I tasted the food, it was like a reunion with a lover. And so it's like, wow, you're so aware. And I got aware of being national, because when I was in England, we were still at the end of colonial time. I would know the maple dance, the English dance, and I would know Wordsworth, and I would know how to sing, Londonderry Air. Then they asked me, what about your songs? And I look at them blank. And then the sense of identity comes in. Because nobody is going to respect you for knowing them, but not yourself. What about your songs? Well, I said, I didn't know anything, and maybe not enough, but you know a lot. So that maybe fostered in us in those days, because before internationalism, a sense of identity of self, of wanting to be where you're from. Which maybe, and so when you see these artists on the walls, right, the 3 countries, it's very much of themselves and in that time. The Filipino art is very arresting, it's very revolutionary, because they were going through this period, 69 to 89. There's the other room, right? You should have a look, where there's this sandpit on the floor, which they recreated an artist's work where you're supposed to step and footprints make a difference. And I think 9 artists recreated a scene, right? Of revolution, of torture, of pain. And I saw a lovely one of farmers, I think, Thailand, where you really understand that the poor farmer is actually at the bottom of the food chain. So when I buy something so cheap, I said, what does the farmer actually get to get? So I will tell myself, I cannot waste this vegetable, because somebody has blood, sweat, and tears for this vegetable. You know, you just realize that. So it was lovely. There's a painting here about the farmer as like a skeleton or something, right? And then, okay, then artists and food, maybe. And so I think for us, we should realize that art or anything is not on its own. It's not that you see this person's work on the wall and that's enough. And you have to say, come tell me how you live. So Goh Beng Kwan is one of the artists I admired. So, and you must have conversations with people and listen to what they say. And then I found out he's a foodie. So, okay, and then he said, okay, I've been to these hawkers. And so I said, okay. Then because, you know, and in those days, MRT was a novelty in 1986. This is a magazine I started on my own called The Food Paper. Because I wanted to, you know, I felt I had a lot to say still in food. Then, so I said, okay, Beng Kwan said, oh, this MRT station, that so get excited. I said, Beng Kwan, why don't we just, you show us where to eat in MRT stops. And then I was with Karen Hoisington, a great artist in her own right, and whose father is Vincent, who I interviewed, who was another of our artists. And I said, okay, we go on wheels and you go on tracks. And so I did an interview, you know, and Beng Kwan showed us where to eat. So that's how he lives. Because an artist is not just the person, the work you see on the wall or, you know, like on the floor installation. What is this artist? And I think the one when I did the ASEAN one was interesting. Can we just see that one? You know, these were, I persuaded the tourism boards of ASEAN countries, and I'm very good girl, I believe in ASEAN. And so I said, can you send me to your, so you have to persuade people, like, you know, send me to your countries. So I went to you know, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Indonesia, Philippines. And you get me 2 homes. I want only artists, architects, and collectors. I'm not interested in other people. So on the left, and you can see his painting on the wall, is Jose Hoya's home. And it's so exciting to see an artist in his own home. You know, how does he interpret his life? And I posed him with the easel as though he's looking at a self-portrait of himself. And I think when I showed the museum this, they were so amazed because they only have his painting on the wall. And then I wrote about, to him, the arrangement of leaves in his home was as important as the art he painted. So this is interpreting that person. I'm trying to find out how he lives, right? Then there was this Indonesian interior designer who, very Indonesian looking, right? And then, but the house is by Loksin, who's one of the top architects in those days. And on the left is this amazing Thai artist called Ducheny. And you know, and these people, I encountered them once and that's it, right? But apparently he's very, you know, and one of our artists here was inspired by him. And he's very into, to me, savagery, because he did wonderful pointillist, and his decor reflected that. You know, that his home was, that all these skulls, none of them human, okay? But skulls, and then he was in a farm, but not savage, but so in touch with the primal part of life, but there was yet a gentleness about him. So you see how he lives. So seeing the art is not enough, I think.
I heard your voice. You know, how we met was through Chong Kit's talk before the exhibition opened. And what happened was I heard your voice and you spoke to say that Chong Kit is a Renaissance man, you know, a polymath he was known. Yeah. So I think this, but I think being a polymath of sorts, going from, you would say, career or professions from one to another, is almost quite natural and fluid during this period of time. And as I think you encompass that, that it's not so much of a set profession or job that you apply for. I think it was just, it happened to be, and it's almost seamless and very fluid. And I think it captured that moment as well. we called this, we called the title of the session Another Initial Impetus. It was after, actually we quoted it from Arthur Yap's writing, yet another gallery, another 4 walls, another 50 pictures, another initial impetus. We found that quite inspiring because a lot of things seem to have started, and you set your own horizon in that way. Yeah, so I think that really is an embodiment of what you are.
But I think it's an embodiment of my time in a place. But one final thing. I think I gave a quote that there is no future without respect for the past. There are 2 things that Chongket said. He built Conference Hall. It was such an iconic, groundbreaking building. He built the MSA building and DBS and the UOB. And then I'm wondering, how come after this always must be award-winning foreign architects that capture the headlines? Now, then Chongket said that he had commissioned some work for the top of the podium garden in the DBS building, and sculptures work, and don't know what happened. They did it and it disappeared. Okay. Then Conference Hall, which I went yesterday, it was such a dynamic interior, and they made it into a shishi place, like pretty with funny rounded flower arrangements, which is so like no idea. You know what I'm saying? Everybody's doing it now. And what struck me is that you do not blame the owner, the building owner. You do not blame the contractor. You do not blame the executive in charge because they don't know anything. I blame the architects for allowing that. If those artworks have disappeared, what it was this architect who did not respect somebody else's art. I don't know which architect. I said, I'm appalled, not at the contractor, I'm not appalled at the DBS, I'm not appalled. I'm appalled at the architect who did not fight for the work of another architect. I'm appalled at what happened to Conference Hall. With those Meng Kuang, it was like the Meng Kuang was the mats on the floor that dominated the walls. I'm appalled. Now, unless our creative people learn to respect the work of another creative person, nobody's going to respect you. And maybe this is an important message to end the day. Thank you so much.
I'd like to take this opportunity to maybe open up 2 questions from the floor. Or someone, your questions don't have to be in the form of questions. You can give a comment or reflection over this period as well. Anyone?
This is Irene Ho, one fantastic journalist.
I think she's just become my marketing agent. But all she does is generally feed me. No, what I found very interesting was this was like a journey into my past as a journalist. Violet was first. There were very few people at that time, very few women who were doing in what has now become Singapore Press Holdings. At the time, it was, to us, it was the Straits Times, it was various other papers. But there was what Violet did was very important because there were very, very few women who were university graduates and therefore sort of sikit atas in a way, who did this kind of reporting. And I remember that when I joined, when I entered the journalism many years later, this was something that, I went and looked at all the stuff before. I had been a great reader. I think I got to meet Violet in 1972 when she was singing at a concert. And I just thought, wow, this is amazing because I'm looking, this hour that we have spent here, I'm looking at all this stuff on my past and thinking, we did all that, wow, in that time. And Violet's absolutely right about people not knowing their past. Because one of the the most important things when we started out as journalists back then, I don't know what they do with artists and all, I've been a journalist too long, and was that they gave us, the editors would just say, you're going to go and do this, and then they will send you to the library to look up what had happened before. So when Violet talks about respect for the past, that is also part of it. You look at it and say, okay, right, let me see what has gone before. I'm not going to be a freshly boiled egg and arrive there and saying, oh, this is brand new. It has come from somewhere. There's been a mother, a father, an uncle, a godfather. Like her, I also knew Chong Kiet, and this was one of those things that, yeah, I don't think I lusted after him, no, Violet. But
You're one of the few.
But what I did was I greatly admired. This was a very different sort of man, and he still is. Somebody who was very articulate, and you could sit him down and he would talk about anything. Today, I don't know very many people of that sort, but exactly it is because he paid attention to the past, not only of his own past, his own family, but other people's past, other artists' past. And that is something that pays off because you take it in, you kind of absorb all this stuff, and then eventually it surfaces in the person that you are.
Thank you.
It's more a comment than anything. The title being suddenly turned visible. It's such a joy actually to hear your journey, because I think you've brought, what you've shared with us is your how you've brought visibility through to expression, through your voice, and then through your writing, through your food, and through so many things. But not only have you done that yourself, but just how many people you've brought along with you. So it's been really nice to see this initial impetus that you've brought in your own career and life, and to see it turn visible here and to bring visibility to so many others. So it's just more of a comment.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for making it a very crowded room tonight. Today, we're very happy. We have one guest who's missing because he cheekily asked Violet. He would come only if there's kueh-kuehs. So on this question, I want to ask Violet: is there any food?
Okay, maybe I should answer. Long time ago, I'm the first person to have ever sung at the Esplanade. Pat Chan, who is here, our Olympian, our golden girl, top fashion photographer, art director, a Renaissance person, who I said, okay, I was asked to sing for the Performing Arts Library in the Esplanade. And I said, okay, Pat, can you come and sing with me? And then I'll have our friend Andrea play the piano, and Uncle Alex at Garden play the guitar. Okay, so Pat being a competitive person like Kobe Bryant, when you've been an Olympic swimmer, you never forget that. So Violet, shall we rehearse? I said, no need to rehearse, nobody's going to come, we just go there and sing. And so she was asking me for weeks, shall we? I said, no need. So 1 week before the opening, I opened the newspaper, and in full splendor was this space we were singing. I said, oh my God, we better rehearse. So I called her, I said, we better rehearse like now, I'm doing scales. Then I started phoning friends. I said, I'm going to be singing at the first performance ever at the Esplanade. Will you come? You know what's the answer? What are you going to cook, Every person. So today, when I was told that there was such an overwhelming response, I thought maybe you expected some food, which we are not doing. But all of you, we are giving you a gift of a $20 voucher to 3 of our restaurants. If you spend $100. That means it's a 20% discount. And Charmaine will pass it out. And we will like you to be able to sign for it so that it hasn't disappeared into the mist of time. So that's the food you're getting and not the kueh. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.